Clyde was an engineer. He had a happy little family, and his 6-year-old daughter was lively and adorable. One night, urgent knocking suddenly came from the front door. 2 intruders forced their way inside to rob the house.
Can't fight fate.
But Jonas suddenly developed the intent to kill and stabbed Clyde with a knife. He then turned toward Clyde's wife and began to assault her. The other robber, Collins, tried to stop him and urged him to leave quickly.
Fucking stop! Let's go!
At that moment, Clyde's daughter walked out of her room.
Kids like me.
Seeing her, Jonas shifted his target to Clyde's daughter. Clyde was filled with pain and rage. What had once been a happy and loving family was destroyed in a single night. Nick was a highly renowned lawyer. Everyone in the industry knew he had a 95% win rate. To maintain that impressive reputation, he would sometimes delay difficult cases or reach compromises. Clyde's case happened to land in his hands. Clyde's wife and daughter had already been killed by the criminals. However, Jonas cleverly became a state witness by testifying against his partner Collins. He managed to avoid the death penalty. He would receive at most 5 years in prison. Clyde could not accept such an outcome. After all, Jonas had been the one who carried out the violence and deserved the death penalty. He begged Nick to help him win the case. He wanted Jonas to pay with his life, but Nick refused without hesitation. Even as Clyde broke down in front of him, Nick was unwilling to put in more effort. In his view, if they pushed too hard, they would lose everything. The current deal, 1 death sentence and 1 5-year term, was already a very good result. This poor man, Clyde, was left speechless in front of the seasoned prosecutor. All he could do was repeatedly beg Nick for help. And so, in court, Nick reached a plea agreement with the opposing lawyer, Bill. The female judge also approved the arrangement. As soon as Nick walked out of the courtroom, a crowd of reporters surrounded him. With a righteous expression, he told them he had done everything he could to ensure justice was served. In full view of everyone, he even shook hands with the criminal Jonas, though clearly reluctant. When he turned his head, he saw Clyde standing behind the crowd. Clyde stared at him in disbelief. From that moment on, a seed of hatred was planted. 10 years passed in the blink of an eye. Nick had risen from lawyer to assistant district attorney. He now had a lovely daughter of his own. This time, he and a female assistant visited the prison. They were there to witness Collins, a death row inmate, being executed by lethal injection. The procedure was meant to allow the prisoner to die without pain. Before his death, Collins claimed he deeply regretted going to Clyde's house that day, but he swore he had not killed anyone. Those words sounded especially harsh to Nick as he listened from behind the glass. 2 prison guards pressed the buttons together. The lethal drugs slowly began to flow into Collins' body. Collins, who should have passed away peacefully, suddenly jolted upright. He was in extreme agony, struggling violently and screaming in pain. In the end, Collins died in suffering. This had to be a deliberate act of murder. Someone found a medicine bottle in the room. Nick noticed a sentence written on it: "You cannot fight fate." He remembered that this was a phrase Jonas used to say. It was what Jonas had told Clyde back then. Nick realized Jonas might be in danger, so he led a large group of officers to Jonas' home. Meanwhile, Jonas was relaxing at his house. At that moment, his phone rang. A mysterious caller warned him that the police were on their way. Jonas looked out the window and saw the patrol cars below. He rushed to the rooftop and fired several shots toward the police cars. The mysterious caller told him to drop the gun and head to an abandoned factory nearby. There would be a police car waiting for him there because the caller had already knocked out the officer inside. Not wanting to go back to prison, Jonas had no time to think it through and followed the instructions. Sure enough, a police car was parked in an empty lot. Inside sat an unconscious officer. Jonas picked up the officer's gun. Under Jonas' orders, the officer drove to a deserted location. Jonas told the officer to get out of the car. Just as he was about to shoot the man, his phone rang again. It was the mysterious caller once more. To his shock, the officer in front of him was the caller, and he was Clyde. Jonas tried to fire, but the gun had no bullets. At the same time, he felt a wave of dizziness. When he pulled the trigger, a hidden needle sprang out from the grip. As an engineer, Clyde excelled at building such devices. The needle was coated with a toxin that could paralyze a person while leaving their senses fully intact. Clyde's revenge had officially begun. He wanted this man to pay for his crimes. Clyde strapped Jonas to a bed, securing him tightly with bandages. He even hooked him up to an IV drip to keep him alive longer. Above him hung a large mirror. Photos of Clyde's wife and daughter were taped onto it. He wanted them to witness the punishment of the man who had harmed them. Then Clyde took out a power saw. He began carrying out his brutal revenge. The criminal finally received the punishment he deserved. The next day, Nick received a call from the police. Jonas had been found, but not in one piece. More importantly, the factory where the body was discovered belonged to Clyde. A large number of police cars rushed to Clyde's home. When Clyde heard the sirens outside, he quietly stood up and removed all his clothes. He calmly waited for the police to arrive. Clyde was placed in handcuffs. From that moment on, his war against the justice system had officially begun. He offered no resistance as he was escorted into the police car. While searching Clyde's house, the police discovered that his cabinets were filled entirely with law books. But Nick knew that Clyde was supposed to be an engineer. There was also an old newspaper clipping taped to the mirror in the room. On it was a photo from 10 years ago showing Nick and Jonas shaking hands outside the courthouse. Although everyone knew Clyde was the one who killed Jonas, there was still no direct evidence to prove it. So Nick went to the prison to meet Clyde again. As a prosecutor, he turned off the surveillance camera. He wanted Clyde to confess willingly. Nick believed Clyde's revenge felt justified because he was also a father. He could understand Clyde's actions. Thinking he had gained Clyde's trust, Nick returned to his seat and turned the camera back on. He resumed his professional demeanor as a prosecutor. He asked Clyde whether he had killed Jonas. After receiving a confirming answer, Nick felt he finally had enough to convict him. Satisfied, he prepared to leave the interrogation room, but Clyde's expression suddenly changed, and he loudly called Nick back. He told Nick that he had never actually admitted to killing Jonas. Everything he had just said was only something he had thought about doing, and thoughts alone could not be used as evidence in court. Nick froze, shocked that Clyde now understood the law so well. Nick asked Clyde what he really wanted. To his surprise, Clyde proposed a deal. All he wanted was a comfortable bed in his cell.
A bed. But a nice bed.
Nick stormed out of the interrogation room after hearing this request. He knew Clyde was playing him. Clyde was using Nick's own tactics against him as a form of revenge. But just after leaving, Nick received a call from his wife. Not long ago, a DVD had been delivered to their home. His daughter, not knowing what it was, had played it on the TV. To their horror, the video showed footage of Jonas being tortured. The scene deeply frightened his daughter. Nick was furious after hanging up the phone, but the DVD still could not be used as evidence. The person carrying out the act wore a mask, so the face could not be seen. With no other option, Nick finally gave in. To get Clyde to confess, he agreed to the terms of the deal. A mattress was delivered to Clyde's cell. This action angered the other inmates, and they began shouting loudly. That was exactly the reaction Clyde wanted. In his view, the country's justice system worked like this. As long as someone proposed a deal, justice and fairness could be compromised. The next day, the trial began. The judge was the same woman who had presided over the case 10 years ago. Clyde did not hire a lawyer and chose to defend himself. To everyone's surprise, he spoke sharply and confidently. He sounded just like a professional attorney, using precise legal terminology. He even gave examples to argue that he had not committed murder. The judge was caught off guard by Clyde's knowledge and was momentarily convinced. She was ready to announce his release in court. Before Nick could object, Clyde himself refused. He angrily criticized the judge. He said it was ridiculous that a few professional-sounding statements could set him free. He openly admitted that he had killed 2 people, yet words alone were enough for release. This, he argued, showed how flawed the justice system was. The judge was left speechless and banged her gavel in frustration. She quickly ordered officers to remove Clyde from the courtroom. Nick was completely confused by what had just happened. He could not understand what Clyde was trying to do. Clyde seemed to be deliberately playing a game with him. He soon proposed a second deal. He demanded that at exactly 1 p.m., a medium-rare steak be delivered to his cell. He also wanted his iPod so he could listen to music. Nick angrily turned to leave, but then Clyde mentioned Bill, Jonas's defense attorney. Nick stopped in his tracks, realizing Bill was Clyde's third target. Sure enough, Bill had already gone missing. Now Clyde had leverage. The prosecution had no choice but to meet his demands again. The steak was delivered to the prison. The warden, worried Clyde might try something, conducted multiple security checks on both the delivery person and the food. When the luxurious meal passed through the prison, it instantly stirred resentment among the other inmates. Clyde asked Nick for the current time, Satisfied, Clyde then gave Nick a set of coordinates. Nick immediately rushed off with a team in a helicopter. Under a bridge in a remote area, they found a suitcase. Nick recognized it as belonging to Bill. He quickly began digging into the ground. Beneath a metal box, they finally found Bill, but he was no longer breathing because the warden had not followed the timing exactly. Bill had died just 8 minutes earlier. Meanwhile, back in the cell, Clyde shared the meal with his cellmate, but the cellmate did not notice that Clyde had secretly kept a bone from the steak. Clyde slowly approached his cellmate. Later, Clyde was found lying on his bed covered in blood, waiting for the guards to arrive.
Get him out of there!
The warden was furious. He ordered Clyde to be placed in solitary confinement. Nick still had no way to deal with his opponent. Clyde seemed to be manipulating him at every turn. To help Nick, the warden introduced him to a special individual. This person was a former intelligence agent. He had once been Clyde's partner. The man explained that Clyde had also worked as an intelligence operative. Not only that, he was a top-level strategist. He had once helped the Department of Defense plan a covert assassination. They had tried for years to eliminate a powerful drug lord without success. Clyde had completed the mission in just 1 week. Every move he made was carefully calculated. He would eliminate anyone who stood against him. The agent's words served as a warning to Nick. The next day, Nick and his superior went to meet the judge. They discussed how to convict Clyde as quickly as possible. While they were talking, the judge's phone rang.
Hello?
Someone had planted a remotely controlled explosive device in her phone, and there was only one person who could have done it: Clyde. Nick had no idea how Clyde managed to pull this off, but he believed Clyde must have help on the outside. Nick thought it was time for Clyde's revenge to end, but Clyde wanted more than revenge. He wanted to bring down the entire corrupt justice system. If he only wanted revenge, he could have killed Nick's family 10 years ago. He gave Nick a final ultimatum. By 6 o'clock the next day, Nick had to declare him not guilty and set him free. Otherwise, he would begin killing people without restraint. Clyde's words genuinely frightened Nick, whether it was real or a bluff. Nick took it seriously. To prevent casualties, he ordered all his colleagues to drive to the prison that night and gather there. That evening, everyone was tense. They all stared at the clock on the wall as it approached 6 o'clock. When the time arrived, nothing happened. Everyone let out a sigh of relief. It seemed like a false alarm, and Nick finally relaxed. He told everyone to go home and rest. One by one, his colleagues returned to their cars. Just as they were about to leave, an accident occurred. Nick watched helplessly as his female assistant was killed by an explosion in her car. It turned out Clyde had meant every word. He intended to kill them all. And this was only the beginning. Nick finally understood what real fear felt like. He immediately arranged for police protection to escort his wife and daughter out of town. When he returned home alone, he made a disturbing discovery. Somehow, a photo had appeared inside his house. It was the same newspaper image of him shaking hands with Jonas. A chill ran down Nick's spine. It was clear that his home was no longer safe. Furious, Nick personally took Clyde out of the prison. He threw a hard punch at Clyde's face. He demanded to know why Clyde had killed his innocent colleague, but Clyde calmly told him that the game had only just begun. At that moment, Nick finally backed down, but Clyde had no intention of forgiving him. Someone who did not even have the courage to stand up for justice would never earn his forgiveness. Clyde said he would save Nick for last. He would make Nick watch as everyone he cared about died one by one. The warden, standing nearby, could not take it anymore and pulled out his gun, ready to end Clyde's life on the spot. But Nick stopped him. Nick and his superior attended the funeral of their colleagues. His superior was overwhelmed with grief. He wondered if they had truly made the wrong choices. Perhaps that was why they were now facing such consequences. After the funeral, everyone returned to their cars. The convoy began driving back. At that moment, a tracked robot suddenly burst out from among the gravestones. In the distance, a mysterious figure pressed a remote button. All the vehicles in the convoy instantly stalled and shut down. This time, even the mayor was alarmed. The situation had clearly escalated too far. Citizens across the city were living in fear, and the mastermind was supposedly a prisoner locked inside a cell. As a prosecutor, Nick wanted to resign and take responsibility, but the mayor refused to let him step down. Instead, he immediately appointed Nick as Attorney General and ordered him to continue leading the investigation. The mayor also issued an immediate citywide lockdown. All police officers were ordered to work 12-hour rotating shifts. They had to find Clyde's accomplices no matter what. Nick still had no clear leads. While he was thinking through possible strategies, his computer suddenly received an email. It contained a crucial lead from the earlier investigation into Clyde. It was a list of industrial properties Nick had sold over the past 10 years. After comparing the prices, he quickly identified the addresses of 9 properties. One location made Nick curse under his breath. A warehouse was located right next to the prison where Clyde was being held. Late that night, Nick and the warden went to the warehouse. The two of them pried open the door and began searching inside. Nick noticed a car and felt there was something strange about it. Sure enough, when he pressed a button inside the vehicle, the hood slowly lifted, revealing a hidden underground entrance. It seemed Clyde's secret was hidden below. The two men climbed down into the opening. They found a long tunnel underground. There were multiple branching paths inside the tunnel.
This guy tunneled into prison.
They chose one direction and continued forward. They discovered a large cache of explosives and firearms. The warden also found a concealed door nearby. It turned out this passage led directly beneath the prison, connecting to a cell. Inside was Clyde's solitary confinement cell. It became clear that all the attacks had been carried out by Clyde alone. There had never been any accomplices. Even getting himself placed in solitary confinement had been part of his plan. The warden carefully entered the cell with his gun raised, but the room was empty. Clyde was not there. Nick found an attendance sheet for City Hall inside the underground warehouse. It seemed Clyde's next destination was there. Sure enough, Clyde had already disguised himself as a janitor and slipped into City Hall. His next target was to blow up all the government officials. This was his ultimate objective. Only by completing this step would his revenge truly be finished. Nick raced to City Hall as fast as he could. After searching the entire building, he found an unattended janitor's cart on the 5th floor. This had to be the one Clyde had abandoned, and the 5th floor was directly beneath the main conference hall. Clyde must have planted a bomb here. Several officers entered the room, but Clyde was nowhere to be seen. Nick noticed a large box sitting on the floor. This had to be the bomb Clyde had left behind. Meanwhile, guests were already gathering in the conference hall on the 6th floor, and time was running out. A bomb technician carefully opened the box and confirmed it contained an explosive device. The bomb was powerful enough to destroy everything from the 5th floor upward. It was also wired to be detonated by a phone call. The warden wanted to call the mayor and warn everyone to evacuate immediately, but Nick stopped him. Clyde was likely monitoring every movement inside the hall. Any sudden action might cause him to trigger the bomb instantly. At that moment, Clyde had already returned to the secret warehouse near the prison. Sure enough, he had a monitor that gave him full surveillance of the conference hall. Inside the hall, everyone had gathered together. They were preparing to discuss the next counterterrorism plan. Clyde quietly made his way back into his cell, but to his surprise, a figure appeared behind him. It was Nick. Clyde realized that all his plans had been discovered. Nick gave Clyde one last chance to stop. He told him there was still a way back. If he detonated the bomb, there would be no return. At that moment, Nick finally admitted that he had made serious mistakes in the past. Both of them still had a chance to make the right choice, but Clyde refused to listen. The fire of revenge had already consumed his reason. Clyde took out his phone and pressed the detonation button. Just then, Nick quickly stepped out of the cell and slammed the door shut, locking it tight. Another heavy door on the opposite side also closed with a loud clang. Both exits to Clyde's cell were sealed. Then Clyde suddenly heard an electronic beeping sound coming from beneath the bed. He lifted the mattress and saw that the bomb he had planted at City Hall had somehow been moved back into his own cell. Clyde took out the bracelet his daughter had made for him 10 years ago. Perhaps it was finally time for him to reunite with his wife and daughter. Once a happy family, they could now be together again in this final moment. Flames began to spread wildly through the room. They burned away all of the man's grievances. They burned away all of his hatred. Perhaps only at this moment did he finally find release.